Hunting for Answers is a production of the Black Effect Podcast Network and iHeartRadio. It often starts the same way, with a short clip, a headline, a few seconds of a video, often shared without full context. A moment taken out of what comes before and what came after. It's posted, commented on, replayed, and quickly interpreted countless different ways. In the age of 24-hour news and social media, harm doesn't end when the moment does. It continues. And it can change what people do next. And those moments circulate. In some cases, something subtle begins to shift. All of it can shape how we understand danger, urgency, and responsibility. And in part 2, we're shifting the focus from individual psychology to media, narrative, and who shapes the story. This is the Bystander Effect, Part 2. Welcome to Hunting for Answers. I'm your host, Hunter, and in part 1 of this series, we broke down what the bystander effect is and why people can freeze when they witness harm. Today, in part 2, we're shifting the question: how does media shape what people think they're seeing? How do headlines, video loops, and social media narratives influence how situations are interpreted and how responsibility is understood in those moments? Joining me again is forensic psychologist, trauma expert, and professor, Dr. Debra Warner. So in this part of the series, I want to focus less on individual behavior and more on how the media shapes what people think they are seeing. So at a big picture level, how does media influence the way people understand danger and responsibility?
Well, there's something called framing, right? So media tends to frame things in a certain way and in a certain light, right? And now where social media has become very individualistic, everybody thinks that they're a media mogul who has a camera, right? And it makes people look at things in negative ways. And so you begin to have this framework of everything being framed negatively for people to view it. And it's begin to morph into something besides looking at positive energy.
Framing in media, including social media, doesn't just inform us. In some cases, it can silently influence what we pay attention to, what to fear, and what to ignore. So do you think media coverage raises the bar for what people consider an emergency worth responding to?
It's interesting because the media will put things out there that are purposely negative and have crisis and that get you to look at it, right? And that's because, they have ratings, but also that's what we're conditioned to look at. There used to be a television station that was online and it was called Positive News, right? And I thought, oh my God, that's a great thing. And then I realized I was probably the only one watching it because people want to look at things to catch your attention. And it's the way that the media has portrayed things so that that's more interesting, or a disaster is a bigger story, or let's chase that news story because it could have something that people need to know. Everybody wants to know the gossip versus wanting to know the things that are helpful and impactful.
So what gets missed when harm does not look dramatic, loud, or obvious enough to match what people have been conditioned to expect?
A lot of things get missed. People miss being helped. Here's a personal story. I was in the car with my husband and we were watching this woman walk across the street. And I noticed it first and I said, something's not right. Like, I just immediately knew something wasn't right with this person. And I said, I think this person's having a major mental health issue right now. And he looked and he goes, yeah, I think there's something wrong. Maybe they didn't take their medication or whatever it was. So we're thinking, okay, what are we going to do? And we're even thinking we shouldn't get involved because we don't know how dangerous they are, because they looked really in distress. But for someone else, it may have been something subtle. That woman's being odd. But I'm thinking in my head, what is going to happen if another person encounters them, right? So how can I help?
In October of 2021, a woman was sexually assaulted on a SEPTA train near Philadelphia. According to police and early reporting, the assault continued for several minutes as the train traveled and other passengers were on board. Surveillance video later became central to the investigation, and reports identified an off-duty transit employee as the person who called 911, which led to police intervening. As more details emerged, much of the initial media coverage and public conversation focused on the presence of other passengers on the train. And very quickly, questions began to form about what those witnesses should have done. In the days that followed, the Delaware County District Attorney publicly pushed back on what he said were false or misleading narratives about the actions of bystanders that night. There were early reports suggesting that the passengers, may have been recording. And then later that narrative became even more complicated and disputed, by different authorities and things of that nature. So what happens when initial stories about witness behavior take hold before the full context is really understood?
So that's definitely diffusion of responsibility. Now, then it takes hold. It takes a whole nother life. This is happening right now. Well, then say exactly what's happening so police can get there, right? Or this is happening and, maybe one person record and other people act, right? But then it takes on this whole nuance on social media of narratives that aren't even true. So then it's completely biased, right? And then people get a narrative that's not true. Now imagine you think that's harmless, right? Because you're all speculating on the news. Everybody has access to social media. So say this guy goes for a jury trial. Guess what happens now? You have all those narratives that may not have been true, even though they're supposed to look at the facts. It's still in their heads, right? And so it skews the data into what you perceive has happened.
So once a narrative like that is set, how hard is it for the public to move away from it, even when new information about that has come out?
It's really difficult when you expect it to be negative and you want it to be true. So let me elaborate on that just a little bit. When you're a little kid, and you can think back to when you're maybe in kindergarten, right? And so you realize that all cars have wheels. That makes them go zoom, right? Now you take that into ambulances and trucks and all of these things. So anything moving has wheels. Now imagine now in our day and age, we have hovercrafts and all that. How hard is it for someone older to change the mindset that things can move without wheels? Now imagine you put that into the bystander effect, right? And you believe this narrative to be true about people or about people who commit these crimes. How hard is that going to be to change that narrative?
Not all stories about intervention are encouraging. Sometimes intervening is framed as risky. When intervention is portrayed as dangerous, chaotic, or legally risky, how does that affect people's willingness to imagine themselves stepping in at all?
Nobody wants to put themselves in harm's way. I mean, that's the survival of the fittest, right? But people don't realize if everybody does that, none of us will survive. So you have to think about what is the greater good in the narrative, but we've been taught to only think about ourselves, especially in American society. We're not a collectivistic society.
So what else could be at stake? Dr. Warner notes that when people don't see enough examples of successful intervention, the impact can extend beyond a single moment. And beyond a single generation.
We're shaping future generations, right? We're diffusing this responsibility, teaching that. So if we never see that and it's never there, you begin not to even have the narrative to go off on. You don't have the script to create of a different narrative. You think the narrative should be, think about myself and not other people. And I think that's why we're having so many things happening in our society. Nobody's thinking about the greater good and us as a society as a whole.
In March of 1991, a Black motorist named Rodney King was stopped by Los Angeles police after a high-speed chase. What followed was a beating involving multiple officers, an incident that was captured on home video camera by a nearby resident, George Holliday. The footage was aired on national television, and for many people, it brought long-standing concerns about police brutality and accountability into clear view. It also raised another question that hadn't been asked in the same way before. Would the full truth of what happened have ever been known without that video? So in the Rodney King case, another prime example of, the bystander effect taking a big, centerfold in the conversation. So George Holliday's recording completely changed what the public could see and believe about what had happened in that scenario. How did moments like that shape expectations around what kind of proof is needed for harm to be taken seriously?
That case shaped so much. That was one of the first times somebody had a video camera, right, and recorded something. It's really interesting that people probably didn't believe that this stuff happened, and then they began to believe it happened and began to change the narrative, right? But it took him doing something about it, but nobody wants to put themselves front and center. A lot of people don't want that. In real life, people are standing right next to you and there is a danger there. Right? That stranger danger is real. And so we have to realize that it is hard for people to do that. And social media has made things more believable, right? In videotaping and recording and seeing human nature. But also it is a way of people saying, I did something without doing something because they have that sense of, an anonymity or autonomy or moving back from it. But it is hindering that getting help in the moment. It is stopping that process from happening. But Rodney King was the case that began to shape all of this in a certain direction and getting people believed about things that they have experienced.
By this point, it's clear that the bystander effect isn't fixed. It changes with context, with culture, and with technology. As more of what we witness happens through screens and is filtered through algorithms, platforms, and even AI, the question becomes how bystanding continues to evolve in a digital world. So in this digital age and with the internet and technology, AI, all of these things further evolving, how do you see the bystander effect evolving in all of that?
The bystander effect's not going to go away. It's just going to take on a whole nother level, right? Because you have a bigger diffusion of responsibility. Now, it's not just people are there in front of you who are not doing anything. It's all these people on social media who say, well, that may be AI and they don't do anything. Or that may be clickbait and they don't do anything, right? So this diffusion of responsibility goes, right? Even bigger.
When moments that lasted seconds or, minutes are replayed endlessly and they live online forever, how does that change how people judge, bystanders afterwards or the victims or other parties involved in the situation?
Well, by watching that loop over and over, you are a bystander, right? But here's where it gets weird. you don't know if it's happening in real time because the loop is playing. And so you're thinking, oh, well, that's old. It's in a loop, where someone may have just seen it and made it loop so that they get the clickbait. And so you don't realize that, but you become a bystander who's not doing anything, and you don't even know it because you believe it's not real. I hope that listeners do something, say something, but I really hope they get, you can't just put up your camera, right? Because that's the problem, is that we're hiding behind that. We have to intervene. And one of the things you can do if you're experiencing something like this, you don't have to act alone. And you can have the diffusion of responsibility by all acting together. But it takes someone saying, help me, let's stop this together. Then it's not just one person.
Intervention can take multiple forms. It can mean calling for help, alerting authorities, or documenting responsibly when it's safe to do so. In Part 3, we'll take a look at how the bystander effect shapes missing persons and murdered cases, and why some stories receive national attention while others rarely receive recognition. If this episode gave you something to stop and think about, follow Hunting for Answers. You can also connect with us through our Facebook group and find us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Reach out to us if there's a case or story you believe deserves attention. Thank you for joining us for another episode. Until next time. Hunting for Answers is a production of the Black Effect Podcast Network. For more podcasts from the Black Effect Podcast Network, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.